the Global CCS update session. We would like to resume the first session. Global CCS Institute, Japanese representative Nambo Hiroshi will be the facilitator. Nambo-san, the floor is yours. Murakami-san, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you feel somewhat refreshed after your lunch break. Now we would like to start the afternoon session. In the afternoon, we are pleased to have 3 speakers. In the morning session, since we ran out of time, while we received questions, we couldn't address those questions, and we couldn't even entertain questions from the floor. But the morning speakers, some of you are still here with us. So including that, at the very end of the afternoon session, if time allows, we would like to have a Q&A, questions and answers session. Now, the first speaker in the afternoon session, from Knudsen NYK Carbon Carriers, Anders Lepsø, CEO Lepsø. From Knudsen NYK Carbon Carriers, the latest status will be shared with us. Please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I realize that this is the first presentation after lunch, so I will do whatever I can to keep you awake. So I hope that the message that I will give to you is interesting enough to keep you awake. I think that when we are discussing CCS and CO2 shipping, we have to keep in mind the background for all this. And in my view, the background for CCS business is actually that it is a very key factor to reduce and to handle greenhouse gas. And that is very smooth for the society because it allows us to do the green transition in an orderly, structured way over time. And I think that CCS business will be in the market and develop as an industry that will be around us for decades, if not even 100 years going forward. The only, of course, difficulty with the green transition as such, and CCS also, is that it is going to be very costly. And I hope that the societies and consumers will realize this, because they will face higher energy prices. But it is all for the good, but this is an important aspect to our offering as well, that we need to keep the costs related to marine transportation of CO2 as low as possible in order to make this commercial sustainable. This is a liquid CO2 vessel where we have combined our owner's sort of competence and knowledge about offshore operations. And this vessel is designed for offshore, direct injection offshore of CO2 straight into the field. And if you look at the bow of the vessel, you see there's a turret that we connect to the vessel that enables the vessel to sort of be connected to the subsea installation, where we then can use our system to discharge the CO2 straight into the reservoir. And of course, by doing that, we are also avoiding building expensive import terminals for CO2 and also building pipelines from the terminal to the offshore site. What we are using here is actually well-known technology, oil and gas technology, pipeline technology, and it is very important to understand that in order to make this as cheaply as possible, we have to think in new ways, but also don't forget all the base knowledge that we have particularly from the oil and gas industry. Thank you. This is our market view, and we all know that the volumes of CO2 available for capturing and the plans for capturing going forward is enormous. And in order for you to understand what this means from a ship owner point of view, you can look at the right-hand graph, where not we, but Clarkson Shipbroker has made a sort of an analysis of how many LCO2 carriers that will be needed going forward. And the numbers are quite small, but I can really assure you that it's a matter of hundreds of vessels in the next 10, 20 years. And even only in Europe, we expect that by 2030, we will see between 30 and 50 vessels carrying CO2 in the North Sea. So from a shipping perspective, this is of course a very interesting business opportunity. But in addition, it's also very important to underline the fact that it is the shipping industry's way to facilitate the green transition and handling of CO2. Next, please. You may know this, but I'll repeat it very shortly still. There are 3 ways of handling CO2 across the value chain. You have what we refer to as low pressure, where we cool down the CO2 to minus 50 degrees at 7-8 bar pressure. Then you have mid pressure, which is minus 25 degrees and 15 to 19 bar pressure. And then we have elevated pressure, which we as a company have developed and is marketing, where you can keep the CO2 in ambient temperature during the voyage at sea. And for reference, the Northern Light vessels that are currently under construction in Dalian shipyard in China, they are based on mid-pressure technology. On the right-hand side of this slide, you see what we refer to as the envelope and how the CO2 is reacting or behaving according to pressure and temperature. And in some settings, we have to, or not in some settings, but in most of the settings, we have to observe that CO2 is sort of a very delicate and sensitive cargo. And the risk of dry ice formation is a risk that we shouldn't ignore at all. And but keeping it at elevated pressure, we have much lower operational risk compared to the other modes of handling the CO2 on board the vessels. Next, please. This is a new business venture. We are owned by Knutsen of Norway, which is Norway's biggest ship-owning company, and by NYK, being the biggest ship-owning company in the world. And the only thing I know is that if you're going to grow a company into new industry where the technology is under development, you need strong and long-term owners. And you also need capital-rich owners, because this is going to take time. And once we start to order and operate vessels, it will be quite costly, capital intensive in order to grow this business. We think that, or when we look into the sort of the market prospects that we as a company have already today, we could probably, over the next 10, 20 years, I wouldn't be surprised if we had to build more than 100 vessels based on what we see as today. And the only thing I know is that number will grow going forward. What is also important with the owners here is that they are cooperating within shuttle tanker business, i.e. loading oil offshore. And the competence and knowledge based on that business is really, really suitable for our company as well, since we are also promoting and offering vessels for direct injection offshore that I just showed you. Next, please. And then, as a shipper, you may ask, what are you doing? And the answer to that is fairly easy. We transport CO2 from A to B. In our case, that means that we can load CO2 from a terminal, export terminal, or we can load CO2 if needed from an offshore installation. Then we can carry the CO2 to its final destination, or where we can offload the CO2 either into the reservoir straight from the vessel, or into a floater that is injecting the CO2 into the reservoir, or of course we can go to a import terminal. What we also can use this illustration to see here is that, okay, this is a value chain game. So in order to build and operate elevated pressure vessels, we also need to supply elevated pressure storage capacities, both on the import side and the export side. And this is one of the key pillars in our offering, where we are always looking into the whole value chain perspective when we are working with customers. And from a shipping perspective, if you have a sort of a traditional cargo, it's just a matter of calling a broker. You need to transport this from A to B. But in this business, it's much more time consuming. So instead of just offering rates to emitters or storage providers, we are working very, very detailed with lots of CCS projects on a global basis, where we are assisting the various projects in defining the appropriate size of the vessels, depending on voyage distance, depending on flow rates, depending, of course, CO2 production as such. So this is very time-consuming, and it's also quite complicated, because keep in mind that not all of the technologies are there yet. There's still technology under development, and that is why it takes quite a lot of time and resources to engage with all these projects. And finally, on this slide is also what kind of customers are we dealing with? Already 5 minutes, okay. I'll hurry up. We are dealing with emitters on the left-hand side, where we are discussing with quite a number of companies that wants to keep control over their own value chain or CCS value chain. And then on the right-hand side, we are discussing or exchanging projects with all the major oil and gas companies. And not only major oil and gas companies, also a little bit smaller than major bread. So it is very interesting to see how this industry is developing, both on the emitter side and the storage side. Next, please. This is our offering. I just keep it very short. The basis here is that we provide optionality, we provide scalability, and we provide low cost. And that is what the CCS value chain needs from our point of view. It's so important to keep in mind that this is, in many ways, waste management. And if you're doing waste management, you have to keep the costs low, and you also need to obtain scale. Otherwise, it's very difficult to achieve commercial viability of the various projects. Next, please. This is just a comparison of the pros and cons, or the various features of how we can carry CO2, elevated pressure, mid-pressure, and low pressure. The important thing to note is that it is still very technology-driven. It has to be commercial viable, and it also depends really on the cargo specification. And this is an industry where, in many ways, we have started in the wrong end, because we are considering investments, huge investments in CCS value chains, but we still haven't reached an overall agreed definition of the cargo. And that is something that is really important that we are able to do, particularly since the CO2 is such a delicate cargo. Next, please. I showed this before. You can show the next one. This is the containment system that we are using to carry the CO2 in elevated pressure, ambient temperature. It is really not that complicated as it looks. It's vertically stacked pipelines connected together. And in reality, it's one tank in the vessel that enables sort of loading and discharge in parallel across for the vessel as such. Next, please. And as I said, this is how we have developed the terminal business of our offering. We are working with quite a number of projects where they are also looking into how to deal with the onshore storage. And our storage system, based on exactly the same containment system that we keep on board the vessel, is providing a very flexible solution. And if you have limitations space-wise in ports, then you can actually put the containment system on a barge and transport the CO2 to the terminal or to the onshore storage via hose. Next, please. In addition to building or wanting to build and operate vessels, we have understood that in order to do this in a proper way, we need to develop the CO2 knowledge for how to handle this on board a vessel. So in our offices in Norway, 15 minutes away from our offices, we have built the CO2 test rig, where we are testing thermodynamics of the CO2, how it reacts when you move it from one cassette to the other cassette, duplicating in many ways how CO2 is reacting when you're moving it from a terminal to a vessel and back again. And this has provided us with what we refer to as deep knowledge about CO2, which is very important. But also keep in mind that if my predictions about how many vessels that we will be needing for CO2 transportation going forward, think about all the crew that we will be needing on board vessels. And nobody has experience with handling CO2 in the volumes that we are going to do. So we plan also to use this test rig as a training site for crew on board our vessels, enabling them to gain the understanding and see how CO2 and see what can happen if something goes wrong. So we are doing leakage testing, and we are doing all kinds of sort of useful experiments in order to understand CO2 as best as we can. Next, please. So we have been a company in operation for close to 2 years now. We are there where we have gained GASA, which is a general approval for ship application of our containment system from DNV, the Norwegian Classification Society. We have done our HACCP. We have demonstrated the elevated pressure technology with the test rig, and we are engaged in 30, 40, 50 projects on a global basis. So we have achieved quite a lot over the last close to 2 years. And the only thing we know after being in the market for, in many ways, such a short period of time, this market is enormous, and the volumes that will be available for shipping and storage is it's a new business, it's a new industry, and for us, it's a new shipping segment in the making. I think I'll stop there before I'm kicked out. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Sorry. アンダさん、we have one question. Do you have すみません、フロアから何かご質問ありますか？
Any questions from the floor, please? In the morning session, at the end of this session, we would like to take questions for the morning session presentations. But regarding the current presentation, if you have any questions.
Okay.
Online, I want to read this one. By what companies are the ships which can inject CO2 directly from vessel made? Do you know by what company is doing some injection from the vessel directly?
I didn't fully understand the question. Do you mean which shipyards are building these vessels, or which companies are offering?
Shipping company.
Shipping companies? Well, there are quite a few. It's quite a few. But we are one of the very few with that kind of combination of competences and experience from offshore operations. But there are a few others offering the same. But we are the only one offering elevated pressure, ambient temperature. And that is providing a very low-cost solution compared to, for instance, if you carry the CO2 in low pressure or mid-pressure, because then you avoid heating the CO2 up prior to injection. We don't need that heating.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
ありがとうございます。Thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, moving on to the next presentation. From Mizuho Bank, Managing Director, Head of Natural Resources and Energy Team, Industry Research Department, Ms. Tamura. The floor is yours. My name is Tamura. I'm with Natural Resources and Energy Team with Mizuho Bank. Thank you. Next page, please. Regarding today's material, as Mizuho Industry Research Department, October 24th, we issued a CCS report. I have with me an excerpt from that report. It might be difficult for you to see this information on the screen, so I would like to apologize beforehand. If you are interested in Mizuho, please search the net, Mizuho Bank Industry Research Department CCS report. Currently, only Japanese version is available, but in a few weeks, we are going to publish the English version as well. Next page, please. In that material, so what is CCS? That kind of explanation is given. Why? Because CCS, those of you who are here, you are all well versed in the CCS. But if you look at broadly, the general public, we believe it's important to raise awareness among the general public. That's why we start with what is CCS. Next page, please. Here in this page, about CCS, global expectations are increasing. Already in today's presentations, we will have been informed about efforts in each country. In each country, the G7 and such fora, CCS is mentioned. So it's attracting more attention. Next page. Globally, about Japan's CO2 emissions. What's the level of Japan's CO2 emissions? Japan accounts for 3% of the global emissions, and power, steel, iron, steel, those are the major emitters. Moving to the right. After the earthquake, after the shutdown of nuclear power plants, the thermal power generation ratio goes up. 2011 was the peak, and then it started declining since then. Next page, please. South Japan on CCS, we created a roadmap. We have been making efforts. As you can see here, 2030 advanced CCS project that's to be launched. The study is ongoing for the launch. The emitters situation is something I'd like to share with you. Next page. Power sector. In the power sector, power generation sector, CCS is one of the options. Having said that, on the part of the power industry, hydrogen, ammonia fired thermal power generation is also one of the options. Cost-wise, which would be better, and they will might be doing CCS. But currently, they are participating in some of the projects. Next page, please. Again, on emitters. One of the major emitters, oil sector refinery business. Again, they emit CO2 at the refineries. How are they going to address it? Advanced CCS project, again, some of them are involved in this project. Moving on to the next. On CCS, currently cost is expensive. I think that's one of the issues. So going forward, to what extent the cost can be reduced? For the penetration, that's one of the important matters, particularly number one, CO2 capture. Compared with the current level, could be brought down to 1/4, then the overall cost can be reduced by 40%. So people are paying attention to this. Next page, please. That's page 8. This page, yes. CO2 capture to reduce cost. What's expected is that the highly concentrated, not the highly concentrated CO2 capture, but the low concentration one, right-hand side, from the low concentration gas, how to do the capture. Facilities tend to become big, so how to reduce the scale, and also energy has to be easy to use. Energy can be consumed, so how can you lower the energy consumption? What about the maintenance cost? To what extent you can lower the cost? Those are the key issues at this level. Next page, please. Cost reduction. As I shared with you before, CO2 capture is where the highest expectation lies in terms of further lowering the cost. But other than that, in the transportation, of course, cost needs to be reduced. Currently, technological development, in that aspect, CO2 capture is the focal point. Next page, please. As we have just listened to LCO2 carriers, this is what I would like to focus on. To transport CO2 here in Japan, while pipeline is one of the options, CO2 emitter and storage site, given the distance, using vessel is a must. You see, one needs ships. Currently, regarding those LCO2 carriers, companies who are involved in development activities are very limited. They have to really make a lot of efforts, otherwise we won't be able to have these LCO2 carriers. Now Mitsubishi Shipbuilding, they have been making a lot of efforts, but moving on to the next page. As you can see here, on top, that's Mitsubishi Shipbuilding. There are vessels, they are Pioneer LCO2 carrier will be launched. But from the Japan's perspective, right behind them, that's the Chinese or Korean companies. They are developing large-sized vessels. Tank size is shown from the third from the left. If you look at that, what we are doing here in Japan and what China and Korea are developing, you can see the difference. These are large-scale LCO2 carriers. To what extent can one do that? That's also important. Next page. LCO2 carriers, concerning here in Japan, what we should do. First of all, common design, or what can be commonized, perhaps should be commonized, and CapEx support is also necessary. LCO2 carriers business and also shipbuilding business, to boost their competitiveness, support, we believe, is necessary. Next, please. So on the part of Japan, to nurture CCS as an industry, what should Japan do? Left-hand side? This is the horror story that we don't want to see. The government or the private sector make investment, but CO2 capture technology, unless it is Japan-made technology, because more you introduce them, that means that there's going to be more and more outflow to non-Japan LCO2 carriers. If they are non-Japanese, as a result, there will be outflow of fund. About storage, if they are stored abroad, again, then nothing is done. There will be outflow of fund. Just to make sure that you won't understand, overseas technology and Japanese technology collaboration is an important option, we believe. But put it in a kind of extreme way for Japan. What would be the best for Japan? To curb the outflow of the national wealth, what should be done? Right-hand side, this is the future that we want to see in terms of technology. Globally, we want to be the winner, and not just that. CO2 storage at that level, that those interests, regarding the overseas interests, Japanese companies could have those overseas interests, and we believe that's necessary. Next page. Next page, please. Thank you. Having said that, so what should we do? It's not that any Japanese technology can be utilized. Japan's technology in terms of cost competitiveness, how can we nurture them so that they can be cost competitive? That same holds true for LCO2 carriers. And overseas storage interests, we need to acquire them. In the center, in the green, it might be hard to see, but using how to refine Japan's technology, we believe that's necessary. So let me explain. In Japan, rather than having excessive competition within Japan, when there are promising technology, then focus on that. Nurture that particular promising technology. We believe that's necessary. Secondly, CO2 capture, transportation, and then store that captured CO2. These are the stages. There must be overall coordination, that the aggregator function, we believe, is necessary. So those people who have this aggregation function, then overall optimization can be realized, not the partial optimization. Last page, please. Sorry that it's hard to see. What we are showing here is the left-hand side, that's capture, and then transport, and moving on to the storage. At the capture, For each sector, CO2 emissions, the concentration is different for each sector. What would be the best technology? Perhaps that can be identified and refined. And next, looking at Japan as a whole, with actual gas demonstration project should be made available. By doing so, that technology can be refined. And about liquefied CO2, the transport vessel, commonization, standardization, those should be the target. Because without such efforts, identify such technology and commonize them, or promoting particular technology, de facto standard that's available, that's common with other countries, we should target that. And as for CO2 injection and storage, concerning this monitoring, Japan is engaged in various research activities. So if there is a good technology for monitoring, we believe it needs to be nurtured. So utilization, maximum utilization, and best practice technology with cost reduction efforts, and then go to the world markets. Of course, we should do so here in Japan, but we need to nurture technology where we can be strong overseas as well. Only after then, we believe that we can nurture the new technology or industry. Thank you.
田村様ありがとうございます。
Thank you, Ms. Tamura. Are there any questions from the audience to this presentation?
ですか。
No questions or comments? Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. So the next presentation will be the last presentation for this morning session.
スタンバイしていらっしゃると思う。
And I think he is ready online from TNO, Senior Scientist for CCS. Dr. Philip Neal is joining us online. Over to you. Please start your presentation.
I hope you can hear me all right. Can you share the screen, please? Yes, thank you. So good morning. For me, it's early morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me to present in this event. I have a handful of slides to present to you recent developments in the Netherlands concerning CO2 transport and storage projects. Next slide, please. Before I start, I have a few slides introducing my organization. I am with TNO, which is the largest research and development organization in the Netherlands. We cover a lot of topics. We have about 3,000 to 4,000 experts who cover topics like automotive, defense research, energy research. And I am in the unit Energy Transition and Materials, on the next slide, please, which again covers many topics in the area of energy transition. We do wind, sun, geothermal energy, and also CO2 capture, transport, and storage. Next slide, please. Our team in the Applied Geosciences team, AGS, covers the topics dealing with the subsurface. So we are the Geological Survey of the Netherlands. We maintain and publish data on the subsurface. And we also do research, have been doing research in the area of CO2 storage. Next slide, please. Our team has a long history in CCS. we've been covering all the geotechnical topics that are required in the area of CO2 transport and storage. And one of the things I would like to mention here is that in the recent years, we have been involved in the Portos CCS transport and storage project that I will talk about in a minute. And we have done a large part of the work that has gone into the storage permit applications, I should say, that are now in place and that will be used by the Portos project as a basis to construct the project and start operations in a few years. Next slide, please. So moving to my actual presentation. In the Netherlands, CCS has been identified and recognized by the government that it is a necessary technology during the energy transition and that it's a necessary technology in the short term to meet climate goals. So it has been recognized as such and is present in various key documents set up by the government, in which it sketches the role of CCS to meet emission reduction goals by 2030 and 2050. In our country, the focus for CO2 storage is in the offshore. There has been public resistance to storing CO2 onshore, and as a result of that, now everything is happening offshore. It so happens that our country has a large number of gas fields offshore, and there is about 100 or so fields offshore that are likely to be suitable for the storage of CO2. On the map on the right-hand side, you see the current current gas transport infrastructure. And in the offshore area, you see the small red shapes that are connected by the red lines, the pipelines. And these are the gas fields that are currently being produced, and most of which will become depleted, will reach the end of their production in the next 10 years or so. It has been estimated that more than 1.5 gigatons of CO2 can be stored in these fields as they become depleted. So the government has developed policy and regulations that favor the development of CO2 storage. And as a result of this, now we see a number of projects developing to start operations well before 2030. There are subsidy schemes in place to support these projects, and at the national level, we have regulations in place that you can compare with contracts for difference. So these give the projects stable floor price for their storage activities. At the European level, the projects can use, for example, the Connecting Europe facility, which provides funding for projects to construct transport and or storage infrastructure. Also present is the Innovation Fund in Europe, which provides significant funding for the construction and operation of CCS projects. Next slide, please. So this is my most important slide, which presents the projects that are currently developing in the offshore area of the Netherlands. So the map on the right-hand side shows the Netherlands along with neighboring countries like Belgium, France, and Germany. At the moment, We have one project that has passed FID, and that is now in the construction phase. This is the Portos project, and it's the small map in the right-hand side, the left-hand side corner. Portos is about connecting emitters in the Rotterdam port area, which is a large industrial area, to an offshore cluster of relatively small depleted gas fields. The gas fields have a total combined storage capacity of close to 40 megatons, and the project aims to inject CO2 at a rate of 2.5 megaton each year. 4 emitters in the port of Rotterdam will supply the CO2, and the project plans to start operations in 2026. And the project consists of a collection network in the port area, an offshore dense phase pipeline, and 2 offshore depleted fields. So that project is ongoing now. It's well underway. The next project to be mentioned is the Aramis project, which is a cooperation between Shell, TotalEnergies, and 2 state-owned companies, EBN and Gasunie. And this project is about constructing a trunk line again from the port of Rotterdam out to up north in the offshore area of the Netherlands, the K&L blocks as it is called. And this trunk line is to have a capacity of 22 megatons per year, transporting CO2 to a large number of offshore gas fields that are soon to be depleted. Mentioned on the map in the smaller circle that you see on the map are 3 projects, 3 storage projects. These are operated, developed by Shell, by TotalEnergies, and by Neptune. These 3 projects will all again be operational by 2030, or even before 2027, 2028. The Shell and TotalEnergies projects aim to operate at a rate of 2.5 megatons per year. And the Neptune project, which is in the upper right-hand side corner of this slide, will be operating at a larger scale. Shell, Total, and Neptune Energy will be connected to this huge trunk line, and they will take their CO2 from emitters in the port of Rotterdam, but also take their CO2 from a shipping terminal that will be located at the start of this big offshore pipeline, the CO2 Next collection hub, which will allow import by ship to Rotterdam. What you also see on the map is a structure that connects Rotterdam to the Ruhr area industrial region in Germany. This is a large infrastructure project that is planned to be operational by 2030, and that will allow CO2 from Germany to be stored in the Dutch offshore. I will go forward quickly, given the time. Next slide, please. This is a quick graph showing the storage capacity becoming available in depleted gas fields in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. And this slide shows projects in Europe and also in the general vicinity of the Netherlands that will start creating CO2 transport infrastructure. And some of that infrastructure will also help to link emitters nearby in the Netherlands to offshore storage capacity in the Netherlands. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is quite an aggressive profile of CO2 capture that happens both in the Netherlands and neighboring countries, which could be transported to the Dutch offshore. There is CO2 here from both domestic emitters in the Netherlands, filling the Aramis trunk line in blue. And then there is a contribution from Belgium, Germany, perhaps France, that could well add up to several tens of megatons of CO2 in the next 20, 30 years or so. And this is aggressive, but not totally unrealistic. And it shows the level of effort that is needed in the Netherlands to keep up with CO2 storage capacity demand from both the Netherlands and neighboring countries. Next slide, please. So currently ongoing in the Netherlands are several transport and storage projects, and I can say that these are quite exciting times. With the first project now well past financial investment decision and well on its way to construct and operate by 2026. We have several other projects that will start operations before 2030, and storage rates in these first projects will already be above 10 megatons per year. So in the Netherlands, we intend to go from 0 today to 10 to even 15 megatons on a yearly basis. And that means that we will have several of the world's largest storage projects in our offshore area. There will be a significant task ahead beyond those projects post 2030 to keep up with the expected demand for storage capacity, and the sort of task that is ahead is of the order of one new depleted field coming online for storage each year. And I think what needs to be done in the coming period is for industry to remove the remaining issues, to put together best practices, and to speed up licensing. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neil. Thank you very much. And すいません、
From the floor, about Dr. Neil's presentation, any questions or comments from the floor? If not, well, online.
One question from the audience, Dr. Neil. I want to read in Japanese. Maybe you can hear the interpreter's English. So,
This is the interpreter. The Portus project in the Netherlands, in the existing wells and injecting CO2 is the idea. In existing pipelines to be converted and to use it for injection or storage. Are there any technical challenges to convert?
For the question. Yes, the Portus project intends to reuse the platform, the wells, but not the pipeline. The pipeline will be new. It will be a special pipeline, but that is will take too much time. The challenge in reusing the facilities of the depleted fields mostly lies in coping with the low pressure in the reservoir and in devising injection scenarios that will ensure safe pressure and temperature conditions in the entire system during the injection. I believe it's fair to say that the POTAS project has found ways to ensure safety and integrity and containment in the wells that will be reused. There will be 4 wells reused. But perhaps the biggest challenge lies in injecting safely into the reservoir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation, Dr. Neil. それではですね、
Well, then, with this, all the presentations are now completed for the first part. But we have 2 questions. We received 2 questions, online questions. First question. This is to Brad Lingo. It's in English. It's about Brad's presentation.
of the amendment bill allow Australia to take in CO2 from other countries from storage in Australia?
The simple answer is yes. Australia is a signatory, a contracting party to the London Protocol. Under the London Protocol, that governs, among other things, the cross-border transportation of and disposal of waste and the prohibition on the disposal of certain wastes. In 2006, the London Protocol was amended with an Appendix 1 that specifically provides that CO2 can be transported across borders from one London Protocol country to another London Protocol country, and for what is referred to as carbon capture and storage seabed storage formation. With those amendments, it does require, under Australian law, that there was a need for conforming legislation under the Environmental Protection Act, sea dumping, to implement the changes of the London Protocol that had been agreed to in 2006. The legislation that just was passed by both the previously by the Australian House of Representatives and now the Senate, and is in the very final stage of becoming law, has now put in place conforming legislation that makes Appendix 1 of the London Protocol effective for Australia. And quite simply meaning now that Australia can enter into cross-border CO2 storage arrangements with other London Protocol countries. It's my recollection, if you go to the International Maritime Organization website, that's where you'll find all the information on the London Protocol and the treaty, and a detailed list of all the countries that are signatories or referred to as contracting parties under the London Protocol for the protection of the oceans. That Japan, Korea, Singapore, New Zealand, and Australia are the, I believe, the primary signatories or contracting parties under the London Protocol in the Asia Pacific. And so that, and now with that legislation in place, that enables Australia to enter into a bilateral agreement with a exporting country, such as Japan or Korea, to put in full force and effect a commitment to those obligations to support a export and then ultimately import and storage arrangement. And then that bilateral agreement has to be lodged as a binding commitment with the IMO. So those are the remaining steps. But now the full legislative framework is in place to allow the export of CO2 from either Japan or Korea for the permanent storage in Australia.
ありがとうございます。それでもう
Thank you very much. Now, we have already run out of time, but there is one more question. I believe this is the question to Anders-san from Knudsen. I would like to read out in Japanese. The LNG carriers, as well as floating storage and the unit, by the year 2027, the shipyards are already in full capacity. In the coming 10 years, you mentioned that more than 100 ships to be built for the LCO2. Is this possible? Would you think that this is possible?
Thank you. I'm not. Could you please repeat the sort of the highlights of the question?
The question, excuse me, the question was, you mentioned that more than 100 ships are to be built in 10 years to come. But for the LNG carriers, as well as for FSUR, the shipyards are already in full capacity up until the year 2027. So for the LCO2 ships, do you think that you are able to build more than 100 ships that you have mentioned earlier in your presentation?
One more time, sorry.
So for the LNG carriers and the floating, the ships, the floating, the facilities, for all the shipyards, they are in full capacity. They can no longer be able to accept any orders up until the year 2027. But you mentioned in your presentation that you would like to build, or perhaps build, more than 100 ships in 10 years' time. So do you think that this is still possible?
No, I got it. Yes. Yes, I think it's possible. And I think that the yards will expand their capacity. And within a few years, then all these LNG carriers will be completed. And then the yard capacity will be more available. Of course, in the beginning, we are looking into projects now where we hope to deliver CO2 vessels by end of 2026. And that is a challenge, but we are having a discussion with Asian yards. Both of them, or the ones that we are discussing with, they are capable of delivering vessels. But that is only a few vessels. But over time, the yard capacity will be increased to facilitate for the growth of this market, for sure.
Thank you very much for your clear answer. それでは、何か最後にフロアからご質問、コメントございますでしょうか。
Any questions or comments from the floor at the end? If not, then we would like to conclude the first part. From so many of you from various areas, thank you so much for sharing with us your precious experiences. And in the second part, financing and CCS project, we will have a panel discussion. After this break, networking break, we would like to start the panel discussion. So we would like to wrap up the first part. Thank you.